The PGA Tour's sudden gambling sweep has reached the locker room. 5 major champions have now forced an emergency meeting, demanding answers before another player's name enters the discussion. Officials wanted a quiet integrity check. Instead, they created a trust problem with a leaderboard nobody wants to top. Golf promotes betting odds between shots, then acts stunned when gambling enters the clubhouse conversation. That irony has stopped being funny. What triggered the sweep? Why did these champions intervene? And whose career now hangs over the next decision? Subscribe for golf's biggest stories without the usual soft treatment. Then tell us, should the tour reveal every name under review? Everything now depends on what happens behind those meeting room doors. The pressure started with a disciplinary action that looked simple on paper. PGA Tour champions golfer Matt Gole received a 6-month suspension after placing wagers on PGA Tour competition. The tour stated that he did not bet on tournaments in which he participated. It also confirmed that he cooperated throughout the process. His suspension began on August 23, 2026, and runs through February 22, 2027. Gole described the wagers as small and recreational. He said they were placed during 2024 and 2025, and he called the violation an honest mistake. That explanation did not erase the rule. Under the tour's integrity program, covered individuals cannot bet on PGA Tour competitions, even when they are not playing in the event involved. That distinction matters. The case did not involve a golfer wagering on his own score, throwing shots, sharing a pin position, or arranging a result. Still, the tour imposed a punishment that removed Gole from every sanctioned competition for half a year. One line had been crossed. The penalty showed that the tour planned to enforce it. Inside the locker room, however, the decision raised a harder set of questions. Players understood why the rule existed. Their concerns centered on how the tour found the wagers, how wide the review had become, and what safeguards protected anyone whose betting account, phone number, or personal connection appeared in the process. 5 major champions then pressed tour leadership for an emergency meeting. Their position was not a defense of gambling on golf. None wanted a betting scandal attached to the sport that had built their careers. They wanted a clear boundary between a proper integrity investigation and an open-ended search that placed every locker under suspicion. That difference turned the issue from discipline into governance. A private sports organization has every reason to protect fair competition. Players also have every reason to demand consistent rules, notice, evidence, and a fair chance to respond. Enforcement protects integrity, while fair procedure preserves trust among players. Tour officials entered the meeting with a difficult scorecard. They had to explain the scope of the review without damaging an active investigation. They also had to reassure players without promising that every concern would disappear. Corporate language normally handles that job by using 20 words where 4 would do. This time, the champions were not interested in a press release pudding lesson. The first demand concerned definitions. Players wanted to know what the tour counted as prohibited betting activity. The published rule covers wagers on PGA Tour competitions and applies to a broad group of covered people. That includes golfers and others whose access to inside information creates an integrity risk. The second demand involved evidence. A betting monitoring alert is not the same as proof of misconduct. An unusual wager can come from public information, coincidence, ordinary market movement, or genuine inside knowledge. Investigators must separate those explanations before a reputation is damaged. The 5 champions wanted assurance that suspicion alone would never become punishment. The third issue was confidentiality. Golfers live in a world where a small private detail can become a headline before the first tee time. If a player is reviewed and cleared, his name still suffers when a leak presents the inquiry as guilt. The champions argued that access to investigative material needed strict limits, recorded handling, and consequences for unauthorized disclosure. Then came the matter that carried the greatest heat. Players wanted to know whether the sweep had expanded beyond betting records into private locker room conversations, shared devices, travel groups, and informal messages between golfers and caddies. Those spaces contained competitive plans, family matters, medical details, sponsor discussions, and blunt opinions never meant for public release. Tour leadership faced a narrow path. Refusing to answer would deepen the distrust. Revealing too much would teach anyone trying to evade detection exactly how the monitoring system worked. The meeting therefore became less about one suspension and more about who controlled the information surrounding every player. But here is the detail that changes the entire argument. The Tour does not stand outside the betting industry while policing it. It works beside that industry every tournament week. Official betting operators use tour data, branding, odds, and broadcast exposure. Fans see live prices beside leaderboards. Television segments discuss favorites, long shots, and shifting markets. Those partnerships are legal business arrangements, and they generate attention and money. Yet they create an obvious tension when the same organization disciplines participants for crossing a betting line. The rule itself remains easy to defend. A golfer with inside knowledge must not wager on the competition. A caddy who hears about an injury before the public must not sell that information. An official who knows a course setup must not turn access into a betting edge. Without those protections, every missed putt attracts a darker question. The irony sits elsewhere. The Tour invites gambling into the viewing experience, dresses it in official logos, and then expects the locker room to treat it like a distant foreign country. Players asked to promote tournaments surrounded by betting content still carry the full burden of understanding every restriction. Conveniently, the odds can enter through the front gate, but a golfer must pretend he never saw the invitation. That contradiction does not excuse a violation. It does explain why the champions demanded better education and clearer warnings. A policy hidden inside a manual is not enough when betting products follow players across broadcasts, mobile apps, sponsor events, and social media. The Tour must show where commercial promotion ends and participant prohibition begins. Gogel's case sharpened that point because he said he did not knowingly violate the integrity policy. His statement accepted the suspension and expressed respect for the game. He also emphasized that he never wagered on a tournament in which he played. That defense did not defeat the rule, but it exposed a communication problem the Tour could not ignore. The champions therefore requested annual integrity briefings for every player, caddy, agent, trainer, official, and support worker covered by the policy. They wanted simple examples rather than legal fog. Betting on another tour should be explained. Fantasy contests should be addressed. Pools, promotional credits, shared accounts, and wagers placed through friends also needed direct treatment. Education, though, represented only the safe part of the meeting. The harder argument involved punishment. A 6-month suspension sounds precise, but players wanted to know how the Tour measured it. Was the length based on the number of wagers, their value, the competitions involved, cooperation, intent, or Gogel's lack of participation in those events? Without a published penalty scale, two similar cases can produce different outcomes and leave everyone guessing. The Tour protects flexibility because no two investigations are identical. Players fear that flexibility becomes selective justice when leadership controls the evidence, decision, and public explanation. Golfers know discretionary rulings well. They also know how quickly one bad drop can change an entire round. Previous suspensions added weight to that concern. In 2023, the PGA Tour suspended Korn Ferry Tour players Vince India and Jake Staiano for betting violations. India received a 6-month suspension. Staiano received 3 months. The Tour said neither player bet on tournaments in which he competed, yet both were punished under the integrity program. The meeting then shifted toward the sweep itself. Champions asked whether monitoring had targeted specific betting patterns or reviewed broad groups of accounts connected with players. They wanted to know whether outside integrity companies supplied the alerts and whether human investigators checked the context before any internal file was opened. That limit is critical. Data can show that money arrived before an injury announcement. It cannot decide who knew the information, whether it was already circulating, or why a person placed the wager. Investigators still need records, interviews, timelines, and corroboration. A computer can raise the flag. It cannot hand down the suspension. Their proposed model involved 5 clear disclosures after every completed case. The Tour would identify the rule, describe the prohibited conduct, explain whether the player competed in the event, list the factors affecting punishment, and state whether the investigation found evidence of inside information or match manipulation. The champions also demanded an independent appeal route. Under their proposal, a neutral panel would review major suspensions rather than leaving the final decision entirely inside the tour. That panel would not replace investigators. It would test whether the evidence supported the finding and whether the punishment matched prior cases. The counterargument deserves a fair hearing. Tour leaders cannot publish every investigative technique or negotiate discipline through the locker room. Integrity systems fail when potential violators know every trigger. Confidential inquiries also protect innocent players while facts are tested. Furthermore, major champions do not receive a special veto because their trophy cabinets are heavier. The same policy must apply to a rookie, a veteran, a winner, and a player fighting to keep his card. If 5 famous golfers can interrupt an investigation whenever friends become uncomfortable, enforcement loses credibility. Still, that argument does not answer the demand for due process. Strong oversight and fair procedure are not opponents. The tour can protect detection methods while publishing penalty standards. It can guard witness identities while explaining findings. It can move quickly while allowing independent review. That balance became the central task of the emergency meeting. The champions wanted 4 immediate actions: a pause on public naming until findings were complete, written notice for every person under formal review, access to the evidence used in disciplinary decisions, and an outside appeal panel for serious suspensions. Tour officials resisted any blanket pause that restricted urgent action. A credible threat to competition requires immediate intervention, especially when a golfer is scheduled to play. Nobody wants investigators waiting until Sunday night while a suspect carries inside information through 4 rounds. The compromise focused on thresholds. Informal data checks would remain confidential. Formal investigations would trigger written notice unless notice threatened evidence or witness safety. Suspensions would require documented findings. Appeals would follow a fixed timetable, preventing a case from drifting through an entire season. No policy can remove every dispute. Definitions still require judgment. Evidence still arrives incomplete. People still make mistakes. Yet a visible structure gives players something stronger than reassurance from the same office conducting the review. The wider consequences now reach sponsors and broadcasters. Commercial partners depend on confidence in both the market and competition. Player endorsements also lose value under unresolved suspicion. One weak investigation can damage every essential link connecting golfers, viewers, brands, and betting operators. That is why the 5 champions pushed for quick, careful conclusions. Long silence does not protect the sport when everyone knows a sweep is underway. It simply allows accusation to outrun evidence. The tour needs enough time to investigate, but it also needs deadlines that prevent names from living under permanent suspicion. 3 major questions remain unanswered. First, nobody outside the review knows how many accounts or individuals entered the initial screening. Second, the tour has not publicly established whether any current PGA Tour player faces formal discipline. Third, the final scope of the emergency meeting's reforms remains unsettled. Those gaps must stay labeled as gaps. Guessing at names would punish players without evidence. Treating every market alert as misconduct would weaken the integrity system rather than strengthen it. The tour's credibility now depends on resisting both secrecy and reckless disclosure. Gogel's future is clearer. His suspension runs through February 22, 2027. He has said he looks forward to returning that year. When he comes back, the conversation will follow him. But his cooperation and the tour's statement that he did not bet on events he played remain essential parts of the record. The 5 champions now wait for written commitments from leadership. Their meeting forced the tour to confront a problem that existed before this sweep. Golf wants the revenue and attention connected with legal betting, yet it must build a wall around everyone capable of influencing competition. Building that wall requires more than punishments. It needs education, monitoring, evidence standards, privacy rules, consistent penalties, and independent review. Miss one piece, and the entire structure develops a gap wide enough for distrust to enter. The next official disciplinary notice will test whether the meeting changed anything. Fans should examine what the tour explains, what it leaves out, and whether the penalty matches earlier cases. Players will do the same. Quiet compliance is no longer guaranteed simply because the letterhead carries the PGA Tour logo. This episode also gives the 5 champions a responsibility. Having demanded transparency, they must support firm punishment when evidence proves a violation. Player rights cannot become protection for player misconduct. Their argument succeeds only if it defends both fairness and the game's integrity. That is the line golf now has to walk. Commercial betting will not vanish from broadcasts. Integrity monitoring will not disappear from the tour. The real question is whether those two systems can exist together without turning every locker room into a place of suspicion. If the sweep uncovers only isolated rule violations, the tour can strengthen its policy and move forward. If it reveals inside information, coordinated wagering, or an attempt to influence competition, the consequences will reach far beyond one suspension. Careers, partnerships, and public trust would all enter the same hazard. For now, the emergency meeting has changed the balance of power. 5 major champions refused to let a private process continue without direct questions. Tour leaders defended the need for strong enforcement. Neither side can afford to lose the larger argument. Golf does not need weaker gambling rules. It needs rules that players understand, investigators can enforce, and fans can trust. Anything less leaves the sport promoting odds with one hand while hiding the process with the other. Another named player would turn this meeting into the beginning of a wider reckoning. A clean disciplinary slate would leave the tour explaining why the sweep reached so deeply in the first place. The next announcement decides everything. Drop the word fair in the comments and tell us whether the tour should reveal every cleared name as well as every suspended one. If honest golf coverage matters to you, subscribe. We follow the decisions behind the leaderboard, and the next tour announcement will show whether those meeting room promises meant anything.